Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week, we're covering 5 things you should definitely not tell ChatGPT, 2 stories on the pummeling of DEI, the new due diligence you should be doing to find cartel activity in your supply chain, seriously, and Florida man's gun-bursting anger at a malfunctioning karaoke machine. But first, Tom, how has your week been, and what do you think has been the most interesting development?
My week was very good, very interesting. I went to a podcast conference in Chicago and caught up on all the new podcast stuff, terminology. For those not in the know, there is a war in the podcast world about whether podcasting is audio only or audio and video. And it's interesting to watch the slinging of mud between the two camps.
Oh my. Okay.
There's important stuff going on in the world, and I guess there's stuff for us to talk about as well.
I love it. Okay. Speaking of mudslinging and fights, Tom, where do you want to start?
I'm going to start with the Cognizant Technologies executives, because this is the longest running story that certainly I have worked on in a long time. I think we have touched on it a few times on Two Gurus Talk Compliance, but essentially, and this case has been in the FCPA world for a long time. I think in 2017 or 2018, Cognizant Technologies self-disclosed payment of bribes in India. They self-disclosed this, the board, 2 weeks after they were notified. The Department of Justice crowed over this quick self-disclosure. And as payment or the result of this self-disclosure and cooperation and remediation, the company got a full declination. What was stunning about that, Kristy, of course, was alleged C-suite involvement in the form of the CEO and the general counsel, although called chief legal officer at Cognizant, were allegedly the persons who authorized the bribe. We had stunning development on the corporate front in the terms of the seriousness, the 2 weeks to self-disclose, and then the full declination granted. And then in 2019, the 2 executives were indicted. Now, for those listening, they will recognize, Tom, this is 2025. Why are you talking about a 2019 indictment on your show today? That'd be a very good question. But for lots of reasons, logistical, defense-related, multilateral treaties, turnovers of administrations from Trump to Biden, from Biden to Trump, the case never went to, and the judge retired. A witness got sick. A defense counsel represented Senator Robert Menendez in another trial. For a variety of reasons, the case never went to trial. And it was scheduled to go to trial Monday. And Wednesday, the Department of Justice announced they would no longer be prosecuting the Cognizant Technologies executives and asked the court to dismiss the case. Yesterday, the court did dismiss the case. Obviously, they were not proven guilty as yet, but there's pretty strong evidence, alleged evidence of alleged guilt. And for the individuals, I talked about this on another podcast, and whatever my feelings may or may not be about their guilt, you're guaranteed the right to a speedy trial in the U.S. Constitution. And 6 years is not a speedy trial, and it was just beyond the pale that they had to wait in limbo for 6 years to determine whether they would lose their freedom or not, whatever they did or didn't do. I thought it was just a huge miscarriage of justice for it to go on that long, although part of the length of delay was due to the defendant's actions. Nevertheless, in February, after Trump issued his executive order suspending investigation and enforcement of the FCPA, the court asked the parties for a briefing on what this meant. The Department of Justice said, we're ready to go to trial. Then in March, when Paul Weiss was put on the no-go list by Trump, one of the defendants, the CEO, asked for his counsel, Paul Weiss, to be removed. And Paul Weiss agreed to that. And so there was a discussion about who would come on and whether that would delay the trial. And the court said, no, we're not delaying anything. And let's go to trial. The DOJ says they're ready. I'm going to assume the 4 other defense firms are ready. and let's go. All of that changed this week. So on the one hand, we would have had a major trial with senior executives, very top of corporation, the FCPA. That would have certainly been of great import to people like us, compliance officers, FCPA jurisdiction and jurisprudence, not jurisdiction, jurisprudence. Still no Speedy Trial Act taking into account. But the DOJ asked for this to be dismissed. I know I've talked almost 5 minutes about this case and I haven't gotten to the important stuff yet. But this is the part where you jump in and you give me your opinion, because here's what's important to me, Kristy. I think this signals the end of FCPA enforcement under Trump. There will never be another FCPA investigation or enforcement action under the Trump administration if they don't, based upon the actions of the DOJ on this case. If they didn't take this case to trial after 6 years, 2 separate administrations, and remember, this case was brought under the first Trump administration. So this wasn't wild-eyed, tree-hugging, left-leaning, anti-FAS liberals bringing this case. This was DOJ lawyers under the first Trump administration. That's how far the DOJ has changed. That's how far Trump has changed. And I just think this presages zero FCPA investigation and enforcement going forward. So I think it's very significant from that front. Obviously, I would have liked to see this case go to trial, but these were 2 men who sat in limbo for 6 years, and now that limbo is off their shoulders.
Yeah, the first article that you chose, Tom, that we were going to talk about today in this respect was asked whether these people would go to trial. And you probably saw that my response in my pre-show notes was, no, he will not be going to trial. So my crystal ball was well oiled this morning, apparently. No, I don't think that there was ever going to be a lot of hope that we would be having any FCPA response. Although, stay tuned, folks. The focus of the FCPA is supposed to be shifting more to cartels and transnational organizations, and that might be related to bribery. So we'll see if there's any of that, I suppose. But in terms of actual traditional corporate compliance FCPA response, I doubt it.
Yeah.
Shall we talk about something that may actually continue to be prosecuted, and that is fraud? Because I think that fraud is going nowhere. Fraud just is our bestie that keeps on coming. And it says it's going to be a follow-up as well to a story we covered several weeks ago about the strange case of Charlie Javice and JP Morgan Chase Bank. The article I chose was from Forbes, and it's called "The Charlie Javice Verdict, a Wake-Up Call for Fintech and Banking." Well, it details the sordid tale of the conviction and likely jailing of a CEO once named to the 30 under 30 list of rising stars. And Tom, this article was so interesting that I'm going to split it into 2 different podcasts. But this one, I'm going to focus on the Chase due diligence process. Because remember, Tom, a couple of weeks ago, we speculated about what could possibly have gone wrong in the due diligence process, that JP Morgan Chase did not find $175 million of fraud. And now we know definitively. So Ms. Javice went to trial and was convicted of that fraud. But her crime was alleging that her financial aid assistance company had 4 million users when in truth it only had about 300,000. The article describes how during the pre-acquisition time, that it was, quote, a perfect storm of misaligned incentives, inadequate due diligence, and a rush to stay competitive in the fintech's arms race, unquote. In the basics, Chase didn't verify the data users prior to the closing. And what happened was Ms. Javice actually turned to a data scientist to fabricate her user data, and she presented it as evidence during the acquisition. And why didn't Chase find it? Mostly because they were focused on the technical due diligence around how the platform operated instead of the user data. The due diligence team also over-relied on internal expertise, which they didn't really have when it came to fintech. And then there were other forces that emerged. So Chase was desperate to get into the Gen Z market. The platform allegedly already had these millions of Gen Z users, so of course they can easily be Chase customers. And then there was this intense competition. So Bank of America and Wells Fargo were both eyeing this acquisition, and speed felt important. And third, the acquisition was perceived as low risk. So how much risk could a platform helping students fill out loan applications be? It doesn't seem like a high risk, but it turned out it really was. So I think there are so many lessons here, Tom, from moving too fast, not getting the right expertise around, desperate for the new users that you want to get into that market. What struck you most about this tale?
Lots, Kristy. I just think this is a fascinating story, but I really like your focus, at least for this part of the discussion, on JP Morgan Chase, because this was as big a cock up as you will see. Enron was actually bought by another company after all the fraud came out about Enron. And not many people remember that. But one of my best friends was a senior executive of the acquiring company. And I don't talk to him very much about it, but he did say once, I asked him, why did he approve this? And he said it was just this huge boulder and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And that seemed to be one of the things that was going on here. So all of the things you articulated, what is risk? Do you have the technical ability to assess a potential acquiring target? Are you FOMO'd out and want to get into something so badly that you're willing to not follow your own processes? I don't want to really put too much on this, but Elizabeth Holmes was a very attractive woman. Charlie Javice is a very attractive woman. Do you want that woman as a part of your team because she's so good, she's so attractive, she's created such a good company, and she would be a great poster for JP Morgan Chase going forward if it had worked? Did that play into it? And it just seemed to me that Chase failed at every step of the process. But you said something that really struck me that I really hadn't thought about, though, which is the transaction was perceived to be low risk. And we rarely think of risk, or at least I don't, as the loss of money in the deal. You think of, potential criminal risk. You think of, we don't make as much as we thought it was going to make, something like that. But losing everything, that's a risk. And they obviously didn't feel like that was a risk here. I'm still really on the fence on if this case should have even been brought criminally. Civilly, maybe, but a criminal charge, I'm still on the fence on this. HP and autonomy immediately comes to mind to me as another huge foobar by the acquiring company. And HP lost over $8 billion on this deal. Lots and lots of lessons. I hope there is a detailed business case study of this, although I don't know why JP Morgan would ever open their books on this one. But there's so many failures here. And now we have it played out in public. And whether she did or didn't defraud, and you didn't even get to the part where the buyer's remorse, was it true buyer's remorse, or did the law change which destroyed the value of the company? Because that's what happened. That's when Morgan started looking at it, and were they just looking for an excuse to get out of a bad bet that they made? Lots going on here. I still haven't sorted it all out, but I really love the way you laid that out as, let's look at Morgan's failures. Maybe one day we'll look at Javice's fraud or not fraud, but I didn't think they were going to find her guilty. I thought that the jury would chastise Morgan for not following their own internal processes.
Interesting. Yeah, this is watching it from a compliance officer perspective of, you can feel the energy of, oh my God, these other people are going to get her company if we don't. We need these users. We have to find a way in. This is the perfect answer. Let's go. You can feel that energy. And there are so many acquisitions where that's true, especially if it's a competitive market for whatever company it is. I think it's classic tale that will be very helpful for compliance officers to use in their training going forward about the importance of due diligence and making sure you're doing it correctly.
Maybe that should be our next keynote speech.
I'll bring it in. We were talking earlier, Tom, about FCPA and about this idea of cartels and TCOs. I want to talk about from Michael Volkov. So Michael Volkov wrote an article titled "The Brave New World: Due Diligence to Identify Cartels and TCOs." So maybe it's just me, but when we heard the Trump administration talking about cartels and TCO is transnational criminal organization, which I actually did have to look up for the record. The idea is, what the heck does that have to do with corporate compliance, if anything, right? I think about the drug gangs and all the rest of it, but it turns out, actually, no, we do need to be concerned about that. So TCOs include things like international gangs such as MS-13 with strong ties to El Salvador, the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, those types of organizations. And specifically, companies need to amend their due diligence processes to include a review for cartel or TCO activity. So Michael Volkov says that material support, which is what's required to get you in trouble, is very broad. It's a very broad concept, and the risks to organizations are severe. So in order to protect ourselves, we have to first understand the geographic areas in which these cartels and TCOs are particularly prevalent. So Mexico, Central America are huge hotbeds for this. So if your suppliers are in these regions, then you really should start to do some additional due diligence. You look for activities in remote or high conflict regions where oil, extractive, agriculture, or telecommunications activities occur. That's in a lot of our supply chain, right? Oil, agriculture, extractives, and telecom. And he recommends that we do those ultimate beneficial owner checks, which of course are very helpful for our sanctions programs as well. And Mr. Volkov also reminds us that the cartel and TCO activity really do come with heightened risk of corruption, modern slavery, human trafficking, and that training on these topics should be mandatory for people who need to spot these kind of red flags. I thought that was really interesting, Tom, that we should be taking this focus on cartels and these transnational criminal organizations and say, wait, hold on, how could this be in my supply chain? What do I need to be doing to look for it? What's your sense about where compliance officers should be focusing here?
I've interviewed several trade sanctions experts on this topic over the past couple of months, Kristy, and what they have emphasized is that cartels do not operate generally with 3 or 4 guys with tattooed faces with M16s coming in and saying, pay us your monthly shakedown money. It is incredibly sophisticated. And that you will make a payment to a shell corporation, which pays another shell corporation, which pays another shell corporation, which pays another shell corporation. And that it is just a way of doing business in the modern business sense, except it's a criminal organization. And just today, Matt Ellis commented in a piece where he talked about how the cartels have literally infiltrated almost every aspect of life in Mexico, certainly in the business world. And that with the designation of cartels to terrorist organizations, corporations are now basically strictly liable. If they do business with, knowingly or unknowingly, even if it's not bury your head in the sand unknowingly, it is, we have looked 5 levels down and we haven't found anything. If it's the 6th level, you're 100% liable. And the federal government is going to use those tools as strongly as they can to try to dislink those cartels and their activities from the United States, U.S. businesses, U.S. companies. And it is going to be an incredibly detailed and difficult process for every organization in America, whether you're on the Texas-Mexican border, whether you're on the California-Mexican border, New Mexico or Arizona. It's not just those companies in southern Texas. It is companies anywhere in the United States which may have a component that comes out of Mexico. You have to start looking at that now, because the federal government has made the decision that due to the invidiousness of how these cartels have embedded themselves into Mexican society, extreme tools have to be used to dig them out. And so whether you think you are involved in cartels or not, you have to look now. And even if you don't think you're anywhere near where a cartel could be or an impact on you, if you're getting anything out of Mexico, you got to start looking. And if you're, say you're in Brazil, and I hope you will raise this with your colleagues next week, if you're exporting into Mexico for then resale or reshipment in the United States, you could be liable. The extraterritoriality impact of this new designation, we're just beginning to scratch the surface on. And I think it's going to be a huge due diligence effort and a huge investigative effort by people like you and your colleagues at Diligence.
Gonna be interesting. Maybe this is the new FCPA. Never mind sanctions. Cartels and TCOs are the new FCPA. All right, let's turn to something that was pretty darn sad, Tom. What's going over at Boeing?
This was sad, and this involves the Boeing whistleblower, John Barnett, who took his own life back in 2024. His family has now sued Boeing for allegedly causing or contributing to his suicide. And at this point, both the coroner and the sheriff where he died have ruled that his death was a suicide. And the family has sued, claiming that the pressure and emotional distress that Boeing put on him as a whistleblower and even before caused or contributed to his death. This has got to be completely gut-wrenching, obviously, for the family. This is going to be just a huge disaster reputationally for Boeing. A lot of stuff is going to come out that is going to make Boeing not look very good. The individual himself, he suffered from PTSD, depression, and anxiety because of his treatment by the company. According to his lawsuit, one quote was that we will push you until you break, and it was in the lawsuit. So it's incredibly sad. It's incredibly poignant. And it just reminds us all that companies have to, even if you don't honor whistleblowers, you still have to treat them civilly and humanely. And the fallout from Boeing is just going to get worse and worse, I think.
Yes, the story of his death is incredibly sad. I believe he took his life after a deposition in this case. So it feels immediate. But I think for us, the gravity of this, we can understand when we're compliance officers, is that retaliation, whether or not Boeing is guilty of it in general, our commitment to non-retaliation can actually save lives. And we don't think of ourselves much as people who save lives, but ultimately, if we can keep that standard so that other people don't have the kind of pain that can come with retaliatory behavior, we really do matter. And I think we need to hold on to that.
Well, that kind of leads into your next story.
It does, right? All right, shifting gears from the terrible to the slightly better. This is from Matt Kelly at Radical Compliance. So he wrote an article titled Nuggets from Navex on Internal Reporting. So every year, Navex puts out the definitive report on internal whistleblowing statistics, and this year was no exception. Matt combed I believe it's 110 pages, to find the biggest trends from last year's millions of data points. So he starts with the fact that reports per 100 employees, which is the gold standard, held steady in 2024 at 1.57 reports per employees. So this number continues this decade-long upward trend. It was the same as last year. And he pointed out that the 2010 saw 1.4 reports per 100 employees. So that means that, generally speaking, more people are reporting concerns. And substantiation rates are higher than ever before, with an average of 46% substantiated. So Matt hypothesizes that this is the outcome of better investigatory methods and whistleblowers having more trust in the organization to give them more details and perhaps not be anonymous. This retaliation question that we were just talking about, actual reports of retaliation are quite rare. Only about 3% of all reports taken relate to retaliation at the company. But what I found most interesting, Tom, is first of all, the report's excellent for benchmarking, and it's extremely helpful for compliance officers. It's one of the most consistent things that they can use in their benchmarking. But this is the first year in which web submissions surpassed phone reporting. So I kind of thought that phone reporting was dead because most people use the web, use their mobile device. There's all kinds of apps that'll let you text if you have an issue, text concerns, just different ways of doing this. But it's really, the phone is still a big deal. I would have thought it was much lower. Are you?
I actually took that information and had a completely different interpretation that, we better get used to non-phone reporting because I'm a phone guy, obviously. Or as my daughter says, what's a phone?
Or as millennials say, please don't call me on that thing. I don't want to answer it.
Yeah. So my daughter, if I wanted to talk to you, I'd come see you. Okay. But maybe or maybe not. I think what it pointed out to me is the need to have multiple lines of communication open. I would have thought walking in and talking to your supervisor was so important. Apparently not. But you mentioned other forms of communication, texting. Are there other, I don't want to say off-channel messaging, let's just say channel messaging apps that are secure you could report one with that would be monitored and would be maintained? I wouldn't advise reporting via a Slack channel that's open to the entire company, but I'm stunned at some of the things that are reported on Slack channels. For me, it drove home the message you need to have multiple avenues to communicate with your compliance function. And it's not the ease for the compliance function, it's the ease of the user. It's all about the user experience. Can the user report? And I interviewed Hema Lomax last week, and we realized that the user of a corporate compliance tool or asset is not simply the employee, it can be a third party who wants to report something. So that means we further defined it as the user is the employee experience, and it could be the third party experience or a customer experience or some other form. So you need to make the manner and methods of communication as easy as possible for someone who wants to report something to you or for you.
Absolutely. Let's broaden our horizons a bit and see what's going on with the DEI world. Tom, you picked 2 DEI stories. We'll split them up, but what's the first one going on here?
I have to say the Trump administration does a lot of inane things, and this is right up there with the top of them. And they told French companies, you have to suspend your DEI efforts. Guess what? You can't tell foreign companies to do that. Now, you might be able to tell their U.S. subsidiaries, but you can't, in Paris, release a letter from the U.S. ambassador saying, wagging your finger and say, no, the French can do whatever they want to do to French companies. And there's this thing called the EU that has another whole set of laws. And this is just absolutely inane, except after having seen the tariffs levied across the world this week, it's clear the Trump administration cares nothing about the rule of law. It cares nothing about having allies for the United States. It only cares about inflicting inane pain. And this is one of the stupider things they have done. But what happens if they actually would be stupid enough to bring some sort of civil or criminal action against a French company for having illegal DEI? We've talked about what is illegal DEI on this podcast. Now, are they going to try to say we have extraterritorial jurisdiction and we're going to bring an action against you? Or is this going to be a part of a broader tit for tat? We're going to sanction Meta, or we're going to sanction X in the EU for violating EU laws, and Trump's going to make up some law that's just pathetic.
Okay, yes. When I was reading about it, it was interesting to me that the substance of the letter itself said that it was any French company doing business with the United States or who has United States federal contracts, etc. So it was a little bit narrow, but in that respect, at the same time, the DEI movements within Europe and the UK are still extremely strong. It's definitely provocative and provoking, and will be interesting to see the response. Speaking of things that may not be the brightest ideas, I'm going to switch to ChatGPT and AI. This article is called 5 Things You Shouldn't Tell ChatGPT, and I had such a strong response to this. I'm very curious about you, Tom. So it's from the Wall Street Journal, and the author begins by noting that her ChatGPT has learned that she likes eggs, has a baby who nurses to sleep, and needs to modify her exercise routine because of her achy back. And what? It would never have occurred to me that ChatGPT is learning things specifically about me. And maybe I'm just naive. Google, sure. Meta, absolutely. But ChatGPT is apparently learning her personal preferences. She also said that it had, quote, remembered even more personal things I won't repeat here, unquote. What is she putting in there? Okay. Apparently, there are at least 5 things you should categorically not be putting into large language models, because guess what? If they're hacked, your data could be exposed. And additionally, humans at the company can review your chats, so it's not exactly private between you and your Siri equivalent. Here's the list. Number 1, don't put in identity information like your social security number or pictures of your passport. Number 2, don't put your medical records or medical tests in there. Number 3, don't put your bank and investment statements, including your account numbers. 4, proprietary corporate information. Excellent, good. And 5, your logins. So people are apparently telling ChatGPT all their logins and passwords so they can prompt it with, what's my Amazon password? The article ends with a great list of tactics to use to manage your privacy, most of which begin with clicking the delete button and not putting your personal information in at all. Okay, so Tom, this article is shocking to me, not only about the fact that ChatGPT is trying to understand you individually, and learn your preferences, but just the idea that people would put their medical tests and bank statements and passwords into an online learning model. What do you think about this?
I think people are idiots. And this is further proof of our idiocy. You correctly categorized the last story as provocative. I'm going to characterize this story as idiocy. Absolutely, ChatGPT is designed to learn about you. And if you put in personal information, not only will ChatGPT learn more about you, that goes into the great unwashed data base of ChatGPT. And if there's a nefarious actor in Russia who says, tell me everything you know about Tom Fox, guess what? Everything I put into ChatGPT, they will have access to. Proprietary, passwords, all of the things that you listed. I absolutely knew all of this was possible. I also knew that people were doing stupid stuff. And I don't want to say, let's be careful out there. I want to say, let's not be stupid out there.
It's the basics. All right. I'm just fascinated by this. I'm gonna keep following this line. All right, Tom, let's do the second pummeling of DEI. What else we got?
It's come to this, Kristy. Mickey Mouse is under investigation for DEI. Yes, the end of the mouse may be here because he has a longtime girlfriend he's never married. And so Disney is under investigation for DEI and illegal DEI actions. Of course, first, there are no illegal DEI actions because DEI is not illegal, number one. But number two, this company has stood for inclusivity since it was founded by Walt Disney and telling stories with characters who don't look like us, who don't sound like us, but bring us a message that we either need to hear, should hear, or are entertained by, has been the byline of Disney since it was founded. They're one of the world's biggest corporations. They bring more joy, or as much joy, to the world as any single corporation, with all of their everything from cruises to parks to movies to TVs to stories to books to whatever. And I guess we'll no longer see a Pocahontas movie. Is that what it's going to come to? And we saw what happened in Florida last year or 2 years ago, and the Disney employee base rose up and said, no, we don't want to do this. And now you're attacking an American institution who exists for inclusivity. And it's just beyond the pale to me.
Well, we were told that there were going to be numbers of companies and nonprofits that were going to be targeted for this, and we're starting to understand who they are. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is investigating Disney. The article that you chose, which is on the BBC, also pointed out that in addition to Disney, the FCC is focusing on media firms, public media entities like PBS and NPR, Verizon, Comcast, and NBC Universal. It's fixated on Apple and Google regarding their use of service, how they decide which news articles get ranked. Since I have no words, I'm going to go to Florida, where Disney is located, and we're going to finish the Depression episode with a Florida man. In this case, it's Florida man at a karaoke party. Yeah. Who doesn't love that, Tom? Do you have a go-to karaoke song? You must.
Hey Jude.
Hey Jude. Oh, that's always a crowd pleaser. I'm like an I Will Survive. That one. I sang that on my Antarctica cruise, and a whole lot of the tourists videoed it. So I'm pretty sure that somewhere on the internet you can find me singing that in Antarctica.
ChatGPT as well?
Ask ChatGPT to find it. It probably can. All right, we're going to be talking about karaoke singer, Florida man Aaron Jablonski. He hit a sour note at a local karaoke bar when he allegedly pulled a gun on another patron after becoming furious over a malfunctioning karaoke machine. Mr. Jablonski was at the Overtime Sports Bar when his evening took a sharp turn and not in a harmonious way. Frustrated that the broken karaoke machine ruined his aims of belting out Livin' on a Prayer, also a crowd pleaser, he stormed out of the bar, fuming at the sound machine. A well-meaning patron attempted to calm him down, but Mr. Jablonski was having none of it, so instead of singing a new tune, Mr. Jablonski pulled out a gun, pointed it at the man, and declared, "I don't effing care." For that mic drop moment, he racked his gun round and began belting away. The victim called 911, leading officers to track down Mr. Jablonski. He was arrested with a playlist of charges, including felony aggravated assault and possession of a firearm as a felon. After 3 days behind bars, he was released on bond, though a judge ordered him to stay away from the bar and hit pause on any further confrontations. No doubt he'll be singing the blues at his next court date.
I don't think we can end on a better note.
At least we had a high note for the end. Thank you for listening. I am Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.